So welcome back. We're looking at emotions and how you feel. And as teachers, we're also reflecting on ways in which we can learn to understand and acknowledge our emotions, and that we can look for opportunities to work with them, to find ways to be calm, reflective, in control, but at the same time acknowledge that we're all human and that we have emotions and that they can be God-given to help us understand who we are. Think about this following story. A man took a ride in an aeroplane, and how do you feel as we go along with the story? Unfortunately, he fell out the door. Fortunately, he was wearing a parachute. Unfortunately, it didn't work or open. Fortunately, there was a haystack below. Unfortunately, there was a pitchfork sticking out of the haystack. Fortunately, he missed the pitchfork. Unfortunately, he missed the haystack. So what's happening to our emotions as we read through that? Hand up, someone. Kieran?
Yeah. It's sort of trying to send us through a roller coaster, but this also reminds me of a game played called Fortunately, Unfortunately, which is the entire point of the game to sort of give hope and then have it crushed and then give it back again and so forth, so on.
Yeah, exactly. So, and sometimes teaching a class can be a bit like that. Some students will give you a high, other students will give you a low, and unfortunately, our brain sometimes remembers the lows more than it remembers the high. Here's a few strategies for teachers to relieve the panics. One is practice mindfulness. Hands up anyone who's heard the term mindfulness and what's involved. Yeah, so Abby and then Gabriella, what could you do in mindfulness that would be helpful?
Well, I did in my counselling course that I did 2 years ago, we learned all about mindfulness. And my mum taught me a lot about mindfulness because she's a Christian counsellor, as well as a school teacher. So I feel like I used to know a lot more about it, but now I'm kind of just starting to practice it again. But I think it's just I could be wrong, but the ability, I'm trying to not use mindful in the definition I'm trying to give, but just at a deeper awareness of like our emotions, and ways to practice it could be like I keep a gratitude journal so that I'm more mindful of, I guess, just what's in my life and what I'm appreciating about my life. You can do like coloring in to give you more peace of mind. I don't know, Gabby, if you have anything to add, but yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I just know that it's about being more aware about what's in front of you in the moment, sort of thing.
Yep, and being aware and being in the moment rather than dragged into the thoughts of the past or the fears of the future. Yeah, Abby.
Yeah, I think Abby nailed that. Oh my goodness. I think it's also that intentional step back to, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I think it's that intentional re-looking at things. Oh my goodness, sorry, I need to go get a drink. Sorry.
That sounds good. Let's swing over to Alex and then Kieran. What are your thoughts on mindfulness? Alex?
Yeah, no, I agree with Abby in that it's gaining that deeper awareness of your emotions. I'd say there are a range of techniques such as meditation, breathing techniques, where you're just focusing on what you're feeling in the moment.
And with the meditation, you can include focusing on positive sayings, songs, readings. You can focus on the moment. Music can be useful as well there. And by focusing on the moment, you're in the present. You're not caught up with the worries of the past. And so you switch the brain off and on a bit. Kieran, your thoughts on mindfulness?
I've only ever seen it used in sort of therapy and like therapeutic situations where it's sort of a technique to really just make somebody else's feelings feel validated and make their thoughts feel heard and it's just understood. And it's sort of putting aside your own ideas and preconceptions and just really taking in what the other person is saying without any bias, without any prejudice or anything else like that, so that you can come at it from a completely neutral standpoint and begin to help them work through what they might be going through.
Yeah, so good. So we're reminded that we need to care for ourselves. So mindfulness is one way of showing care for yourself, saying nice things to others, but also saying nice things about yourself, preparing and planning ahead. So as you're aware, the more you can prepare and plan before a class and have backup plans, then the more you'll be able to have that sense of being in control and changing your mindset. Certainly a negative mindset can come in, but it's never the end of the world. There's always better things to help. Anxiety can be a problem. We can worry both as teachers and as students, and then there's a lot of suggestions that can help you to overcome that. Mindfulness is one of those. Here we have 6 facial expressions, so another little exercise. Abby and Paige. So Abby, can you do the top line and then Paige the bottom line? What do you think we've got going on here?
First one, like angry, obviously, like kind of angry.
Yes.
Or frustrated. The second one, shocked or surprised. Oh, hang on, but the third one could also be surprised. Maybe the middle one is like a negative surprise.
Yes. And any thoughts, Abby, if this is a parent that comes in and you tell them that my student's not going to get high distinctions in every subject, so there is a shock, how could that be? They're the most perfect students. Maybe they haven't worked. Now the question is, are they angry at you or are they angry at the student? Any thoughts? What do you do, Abby, to stop taking all this emotion on board? What's your response as a teacher?
Oh man, I mean, personally, like in my life now, it's something I always tell Paige as well, to be secure with where you stand first. Like if you're secure in your emotions about, I don't know, a particular student, or you're secure in knowing that what they've done is wrong and you know it to be true. When you're firm in that, it's harder for when, I guess it's harder for that to change. Whereas if you're not, secure in that, and then you have external influences like a parent's emotions, it can inflict on that in a negative way, and it can change your response. Like, oh, maybe they're not that bad, or maybe, they could get high distinction or whatever it is. So I think being secure in how you perceive whatever it is, whatever situation, can be best. So the parents' emotions don't, affect you and the way you perceive it.
So being secure is a great one. And what we were saying before about having things like mindfulness to switch off and realise that this is not the end of the world. Paige, the bottom row, what are the 3 responses we've got going on here?
It's kind of difficult, but I kind of saw this one to be like, I don't know why my head went to it being in a conversation. Like I make that face and I'm like, nah, like kind of, I don't know, like disagreeing with someone. And then the second one's probably like, oh yeah, like I don't know, I agree with that. And then I don't know the last one.
They're similar, aren't they? The first and the last. And Paige, how do you respond when you get the parent who's surprised that their student has not got HDs in every subject and is not regarded as perfect? How do you respond?
I guess with just like grace and probably not those faces.
I like that. Don't show faces. And you got to be really careful with the faces, can't you? And so you got to show, and maybe you need to think gracious Christian thoughts and think, that there. So they're great responses. And so, and here's one suggestion that we've got: anger, fear, surprise, disgust, joy, sadness. And so they're the sort of things that can happen. Now, there are cultural differences. And if you have students from different cultures, then some people will see things as gross, and then others won't see them as necessarily so bad. There can be medical reasons for things. And there was a railway worker in 1848, Phineas Cage, had a terrible injury where a piece of metal went through the brain and wiped out his emotional response. And so he saw things different. Now, some people may be addicted to emotions. So some people go on Facebook or whatever because you want to get as many likes as you can, or Instagram. And then other people, it doesn't worry them at all. And then on the right-hand side, we have the emotions of the cat: irritated, excited, sad, sleepy, hungry, content, etc. And some people, of course, may be like that. They may show that sort of same level of non-emotion. So when we're doing a subject like science or history, should we take emotion out of it? If you're going to select teachers, what are you looking for? Someone who's emotional or less emotional? Yeah, so is it more important that a teacher know the content of their subject or be emotionally balanced? And then the final one is, are men and women more rational? So let's go through and start at the bottom, say with Paige, and work our way up. And then you can choose one page. Which one would you like to comment on? And then Gabriella and Abby.
I'm going to go with the scientist one.
Yeah.
Is this in the context of being a science teacher?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to say, I think it's important to kind of have a balance. I think it depends on, what kind of teacher do you want to be. For me personally, when I think back to my teachers, the ones who were so focused on the content were more so the, I don't know, I guess, yeah, the ones that have kind of emotion to it are the ones that I remember most. I feel like if you're being a teacher that's just too focused, like content, there's no emotion in what you're teaching, I guess.
Isn't that interesting? I think that's true. I think the maths teacher I remember most out of 6 or 8 years was the one who was so excited and really got into it. And so that's a good point. Abby, which question and what answer?
Probably the part where it says, is it more important for teachers to know the subject or be emotionally balanced? It's funny that Paige said that because I've literally learned how to write an English essay for the first time only up until like year 12 with my English teacher. And I still remember how I wrote this particular essay because of her passion behind it. She was so passionate about what she was teaching, and it just made all the difference. But more than that, it was, and I think Alex, you can probably agree with me on this one, is that a lot of the teachers, particularly at our high school, were emotionally invested in their students, which again made the difference. That it didn't matter what sort of content they were teaching, students were willing to listen and learn because they had that emotional relationship with their teachers. So for me, that just made the difference of, I knew and understood the content, and I loved learning about it because I loved my teacher. So I don't know, I think that is super important to have a balance, because if you don't have emotion, it's just like dead. I don't want to learn anything. I'm not motivated to really work hard. But when there is love in it, it's like, okay, I really want to prove myself worthy of everything that you've taught me because of the relationship that I had with my English teacher. So
and so that's the balance of passion for teaching, but also passion for content, isn't it? And passion for both. Gabriella, your thoughts?
Yeah, the question that I was thinking about is, should history be devoid of emotion? I think you can't separate history, like the study of history, from emotion, because I think a lot, if not all, of historical moments stem from an emotional reaction or response to something. Like, you look at the Holocaust, that's made up of people's emotional responses, and the reason behind that is a response to something that happened in someone's life, which is emotional, so emotionally driven. So I don't think history can be devoid of emotion, because I think I don't know, you'd be left studying because there wouldn't be much. I don't know. That's just my.
Yeah. And interestingly, of course, with history and with English, you've got the big tragedies. And so probably the biggest tragedy is often a death or suffering. And so stories and actually historical events that we're interested in often reflect on these matters. And I guess there's always the challenge of bringing people into the story, but how far do you go? And certainly with the Holocaust, you can go to, say, an Auschwitz situation or a Dachau situation. And so, yeah, if you go there and then look at the images, then and then you can talk about the images there at Auschwitz, and yeah, it certainly stirs the emotions incredibly. Yeah, certainly the gas chambers, the taking of all their suitcases and things, and then cutting their hair off, and the boy with the striped pajamas, I find a very moving story that captures that. So as you say, we learn something about our emotions, and perhaps it's good to balance it and say, you know, we can have that sense of sympathy and feeling, but there are then questions raised. You know, would we have gone along with the Holocaust? And, you know, where would we be? And I think it's worth acknowledging the Christian message in Genesis 1. All things are good. And so I think it's worth acknowledging that there's good in our lives and good in the way we respond to emotions. And then you've got Genesis 3, Adam and Eve and the fall. And I think it's worth responding that evil can be present in every one of us. And so in some church traditions and Christian traditions, they have an opportunity every week to say, Lord, forgive me of my sins. Lord, this is where I've failed. And sometimes we don't have that acknowledgement of evil and seeking forgiveness. And then we move on to the hope in Jesus and the hope of God and salvation and restoration. And so I think we have emotions that connect with evil and emotions that connect with the good of creation and the good that comes through transformation and salvation. I think they're quite important. Alex, and then Martha, what's a question that stood out to you?
Which ones are left again?
Oh, you can go for any if you wish.
Okay, I might go with, are men or women more rational?
Yeah, a brave man, Alex.
Yeah, upon what society will tell you that men are probably more rational, but I don't agree, because
a good move, Alex.
society also says that men shouldn't show their emotions, which I don't agree with either. I believe there are plenty.
Yeah, so good.
Rational women and men. It's pretty equal.
Yeah, sounds good. Martha, your thoughts on one of the questions?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the history idea and how emotions relate to that as well. And I think I was thinking about my own education. And I remember in high school learning and primary school learning about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but not learning about the harsh reality of what they went through and at the hands of like white people. And so it was one of those things that I think there's a valid place for learning deeply about the evil and the bad stuff that's happened, because it will hopefully help us not make the same mistakes and just help us again with empathy and understanding that and even now it helps me as an adult understand why Indigenous people might get offended or upset about certain things. Like, it makes complete sense. And, and as Christians, we need to be working towards reconciliation and things like that. So I just think, I think it's a really good, vital thing, just like Gabby said.
Yeah, so important. And certainly the white people and the native people, I watched the John Wayne movie a day or two back, and they were saying, the dreadful Native American Indians were going to attack the white people. And John Wayne was sort of saying, we've got to wipe them all out. And I thought, you wouldn't be able to even make a movie like that now, I don't think. I think that really pointed out the challenges being faced. And I like what you say about learning deeply about evil and the bad things that can happen. One of the things that stands out to me is the them and us approach. So anytime that we see us as the good guys and the good people and them as other people in some ways, I think this othering is quite dangerous. And I think the more we can understand the danger of seeing the other as different and the other as inferior, that's important. A failure to listen, I think, is important. The importance of empathy we've talked about, importance of equality. And as I read scripture, I'm reminded that, like a family, you try and show equality to all your children. And humility, I think, is another factor there. Kieran, your thoughts on one of the questions?
Yeah. What does the question mean by emotionally balanced? Question number 4.
Yeah, well, on one side, you've got the teachers who have no emotions at all. They know their subject. And then you've got the others who balance knowledge with emotion. But it's not just emotion that flies off and says, this is the emotion, but it's a balanced set of emotions that includes passion, but at times will stop and listen to the students and allow the students to be passionate. So I think balanced in terms of emotion means that there's self-awareness, there's awareness of different emotions, just like you can raise volume and speed of speaking, you can also raise emotion and then you can tone back on emotion, making space for others. All of that, I think, speaks to balance. Your thoughts, Kieran?
I think they should be equal, honestly, because emotions themselves are really just a massively broad spectrum where you've got emotions that deal with anger and fear. You got emotions that deal with happiness and joy. And then you got the ones that are actually very useful towards imparting knowledge, which is passion and sort of a fire for your subject and sort of a love for your subject. And so I think with that passion and with that fire and that love for the subject comes the knowledge of it. But it's but I think it's really important for teachers to find the balance between being passionate for their subject and teaching it in a way that the students can also pick up that passion, not just overcoming them with information after information all at once, just completely bombarding them with it because that you just want to get all the information out and you're really passionate about it and you're really just speaking about it really quickly like I am right now. But instead finding that appropriate meter in your talking, calming yourself down and actually taking time to think about the words that you're saying. It's really important for teachers to find that while also knowing their subject to the point where if one child doesn't get it, they can find a different avenue to explain it and still achieve that same level, that same quality of education, that same level of teaching for each different circumstance.
Yeah, so good. I think that's very, very important. One of the aids to do this can be Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. Now, hands up those who've seen Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions before. Alex, can you tell us briefly what's this Wheel of Emotions and how can it be helpful and useful?
Yes, I can say what it is. It is all the basic emotions and their extensions of each one's.
Mm.
And what was the other question?
Yeah, and how would you use this perhaps in teaching or self-understanding or understanding your students?
I think you were talking about it briefly before the session, and its importance in creative writing, especially because the importance of emotion in writing especially is important.
Yeah, and certainly in creative writing, you might want to try having a character in your creative writing who shows more joy. And then over, as opposed to that, you might want to have an antagonist as opposed to the protagonist. And the antagonist might be someone who's filled with anger or fear or surprise. And so you can play off different characters playing off against one another. But you can also use this in teaching, where you can recognize that anger can go from annoyance to rage, that disgust can go from a little bit of boredom to loathing, that sadness can go from pensiveness to real deep sorrow. And then in between these different emotions, Plutchik's suggesting that a combination of joy and trust can be what we feel in love. And that's a bit more discussed. But I think it's interesting to recognize that there can be opposites as well. A more simplified version here shows some of the opposites and some of the ways in which they fit together as well. Any further thoughts, Alex, on these different emotions?
I was just wondering why they made the color red as joy.
Yes, I agree. It should be anger, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I agree. It's good to see the opposites in this format.
That sounds good. And does someone else have any thoughts on the usefulness of this wheel of emotions, how it helps them? But what I think is useful is that they're saying, rather than a huge number of emotions, if we could name 8 of them and realize that some of them are really going to bring us a lot of feeling fine and happy, and it's worth diary writing in our journal at times. What are the things that bring me joy, and a deep sense of joy, and reflecting on those? I help a person, I get a sense of joy from that. I exercise, I get a sense of joy from that. I talk to some fellow students or fellow teachers, and there's a sense of acceptance, and as I give back to that, and then I anticipate things are going to go well. And so we see that there's 3 or so bring optimism and love. And then there's usefulness in fear. If I'm not well prepared for my class, then there are fears. There's usefulness in surprise. What could happen or go wrong? Sometimes in a class, I'll think if something goes wrong, I'll have plan B to work with. And so I might have a few YouTubes up my sleeve. And so if I was to suddenly lose my voice, and suddenly, as Gabriella had before with the dry throat, that can happen. And so if I was to have the YouTube and I could switch that on, so surprise and fear can remind me to have these plan Bs. Sadness too, when we're working towards something, I think they tell me it's important to acknowledge sadness at loss. And so if we've got a position in the school, we're running a camp, and then they come and tell us you're no longer running the camp, and there's going to be a sense of loss. So maybe I'll write a great poem about it. Oh, I lament at not taking this camp. I would have been so good. So there are ways to sort of deal with sadness. I think certainly having some other people that you can trust and work with, that you're not going to bite their ear off all the time, and having a range of people is helpful. Disgust is worth thinking through as well. What is it that causes us to be disgusted, and how do you work that through? Anger, it could be part of the fight, flight. How do you work that through? So I find it's quite useful to regularly have a look at these different emotions and to think how they apply. Any thoughts on or questions on Plutchik's 8 basic emotions in a colour wheel and how they are useful? You may be able to use this in other assignments that you're working on, and it's interesting how they show up in our face, how they show up in expression, and you may find those very useful as well. On the outer edges, you've got the low intensity towards the center, stronger intensity, and then closer in, you've got very strong intensity as well. So emotions are part of our human biology. The fact that we've got a body, they're going to be triggered, and they're not who we are. They tell us about the things that are happening around us and how our body wants to respond by either having fear or having concern. So these emotions are going to tell us things are going well. And actually, if you ever have a party and they celebrate you are the most wonderful person ever, has anyone ever felt like me? You don't want to take it too far. Yeah, you don't want to think that you are the greatest person ever. Probably you need to take a little bit of celebrating with them and to file that away for the future when you're not so fit. And the opposite's true as well. When they're saying you're the worst person ever, then it's worth not taking that too far as well, and remembering there were times when they said I was the greatest person ever. I mean, imagine running to be Prime Minister of the country. I mean, you're going to be either up there as the greatest hero for 4 years, and you could be the greatest hero for 8 years, and then they're going to say to you, to John Howard or something, you were a hero for 8 years, but now you're the worst person ever. We're going to put you to one side. And you got to have a pretty level understanding of yourself. There are some exercises you can take into the classroom. They sell cards that you can pass around, and you can get students to trial. How do you feel when you express these different emotions? What causes you to express these different emotions? How do you respond? And there are also worksheets that you can draw on, and you can get the students to reflect on. When you get a high grade, how do you feel? When you get a low grade, how do you feel? And what would be a more balanced response? And in many ways, you are not the grade that you get in your assignments. It's just telling you that at this particular time, at this particular stage, things aren't going so well. Anyone ever come across Gregor Mendel and know what the name? Alex, can you tell me what's Gregor Mendel famous for?
See the guy with the peas?
Exactly. So he did the pea experiment, and up till that time, they thought if you took a black cat and crossed it with a white cat, then you'd get a grey cat. But Gregor Mendel's father was a farmer, and he worked out if you took wrinkly peas and smooth peas and crossed them rather than getting something halfway in between, 1/4 would be wrinkly, 1/4 would be smooth, and then the other 2/4 would have a combination in between. And he simply found also with the green and the yellow, 1/4 would be green, 1/4 would be yellow, and in between. So he's said to be the father of genetics and how inheritance and ancestry and all of that. And so when he went to study at school, unfortunately he had a nervous condition, and he also had a bit of illness thing. And so he left halfway through the exam and failed, and then went on to do university. And again, his nervous condition kicked in and went on and failed. Intriguingly, he became a minister in the church, an Augustinian friar, and then eventually got promoted to abbot or bishop. So despite the challenges, but it's intriguing that he's a leader, thinker, and his anniversary of his birth, 1822 to 2022, is coming up on July the 20th. But amazing example of someone who had failed exams, could have been very disappointed in life. Yeah. Anyone know anything else about Mendel? Yeah, a very famous thinker who failed. And so sometimes we forget. Actually, Einstein was hoping to do something great, and the only job he could get was in a patents office, filing people's patents. And while he was there, he wrote a short 3-page paper that he submitted that might get published, and won the Nobel Prize, and did well. So you can find things don't go so well, and it can turn around, can't it? So when it comes to emotions, what's the role of emotion in critical thinking? As critical thinkers, we need to be aware of emotions like anger and fear, and that they could stop us in thinking well. We might have emotional reasons for thinking differently. Emotions of empathy and compassion and interest can enhance critical thinking, and so that can be useful as well. So be aware of the differences there in emotion and how they can affect the way things go and how you feel. I found it interesting. I was looking at music for a while, and I put together some notes. When we talk about emotions, music can be very useful, and you can play some music, and that could be useful there for you. Now, there is a approach to music that's called the Mozart effect. And in 1993, there was the idea that if you played Mozart to children when they're 1 year old, their IQ would go up. And if we play Mozart to all of you, then you'll get higher grades in your assignments. However, that is much discussed because it's not as simple as that. But there's no doubt that music will help you feel more positively. Music can help you to lament and have sorrow. Music can help you to be active, to be more productive. It can affect your mood. Afro-American spirituals were seen as assistants to life and work. So music can affect emotions. And so people who listen to certain kinds of music can be happier overall. So the Mozart effect doesn't necessarily work for everything, but music can be useful as well. I was playing with some ideas on art and spirituality, and I felt that there's a lot of value in painting, drawing, and you might want to think about how art and drawing, and someone mentioned before about the value of art and drawing when it comes to emotion. Has anyone got any thoughts on music or art? How can they help you emotionally? How can music, art, or other humanities and arts, poetry is another one. So if you feel really down, you could write poetry. Interestingly, the worse you feel, the better poetry you might write, the better sad songs you might write. And so the more motivated you could be to go out and become a lawyer and change the world. So, feeling bad can have its upside. Yeah. Anyone got any thoughts on art, music, poetry, any of the arts, drama, and how they can help in terms of emotions? Alex?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for both music and art.
Yeah.
And out of my own experience, I can say that they're both hobbies of mine. And so whenever I sit down for an hour each day, I guess, it brings you a new sense of renewal, I guess. As if you're playing music, especially, you're putting all your focus towards that. And it's just really renewing and relaxing.
And it takes your mind to another point away from all the challenges that might be in the family, challenges that might be in life, in the class. And by taking that focus onto another point, sport will do the same. Did you know what's one of the reasons that Thomas Arnold developed rugby as a sport at rugby school? Anyone want to put their hand up? And one of the things that Thomas Arnold was that if we came up with these rules at rugby school, and we'll call the game rugby, then as a Christian, it will help people to work with teamwork, etc. I don't know whether he would then add bash one another down and push one another over, but in the English school setting, then Thomas Arnold's idea of rugby was another way of relaxing. Sport can be relaxation. Emotional intelligence is very important. It's the ability to perceive, to appraise, to express, to regulate emotion, and it's related to the ability to reason. So if you can understand other people, understand emotions, if you can see when people are feeling high, when people are feeling low, then that will help make decisions. So if you notice that some of the students are feeling down, disappointed, then that'll help you make decisions in the classroom. Emotions such as empathy, moral indignation, love, happiness, even guilt can help reasoning. And the empathetic person is more flexible and open to other perspectives, listening and caring. This openness can motivate critical analysis of problems and situations and help formulate action plans. Emotions can also work against critical thinking. So if you have fear or anger, you could make the wrong decision. And we're vulnerable to emotional appeals. So someone comes along and says, please, sir, I know you only gave me a pass, but you should have given me a high distinction. You know, I've got others around who've been putting me down for the last 3 years. A high distinction would lift my feelings, and then I would go on and do something with my life. But it's probably not the way education works, pleading your way through. And we do need to integrate reason and emotion rather than just rely on one or the other. So can I get everyone to write down what's some of the things that stood out to you in today's class as we've talked about emotion, and then we've briefly touched on some of the other more intuitive and emotional oriented subjects and emotional oriented methods. We've talked about the challenge of emotions, both as teachers and for students. And we've talked about ways in which it's important to acknowledge the various emotions and the way in which our body is going to kick in with anger. It's going to kick in with disgust. It's going to kick in with various emotions, but we are not our bodily response. We may feel sweat. We may feel the blood pressure rising, the red color of our face as we're angry or disgusted, but that's not us. We are more complex than that. We've been made with all of these abilities to think on different things, to celebrate different things. And then feelings, we are not our feelings. And then finally, we have this capacity to think well, and to engage with God. And some religions are just emotion. Other religions are just thinking, but God has given us a capacity to engage with both thinking and emotion. So if we work our way up, Abby, what stood out to you? And then Paige and Gabriella.
I think a lot stood out to me. The reason why I love this subject is because it does get me to think about what I'm thinking about. And on one of the, I think it was this week's or last week's readings about, actually no, it was a couple of weeks ago, sorry, the scientist and his faith. I was really, one of the quotes stood out to me, and I'm going to butcher this and I'm not going to get it 100% right, but it was something like, faith is the reason, and then the revelation requires us to think with our minds and our spirit as well. And I think that really kind of relates to what we've been learning about today too, is because we need to think. And just like what you were saying, how God's given us the ability to think with our minds as well. I think so often I relate my faith back to just my emotion of how I'm feeling. But it's both, and I forget that too. So I think just the importance of having that well balanced in every area of our lives, but particularly with in a classroom as well, to be passionate about something and to know the content as well. But just in our personal lives as well, to have that balance.
I love that, Abby. I think that's really well said. And I love your enthusiasm and interest there as well. Paige, your thoughts on what stood out to you?
Yeah, I'm like Abby, a lot stood out to me, but I think the part, because I just think that there was a lot of discussion around it, was the importance of kind of combining emotions and passion and weaving that through content. I think is all of us as teacher trainees, like learning to be teachers, I think that's super important to think about.
Yeah, so good. So the importance of emotion and passion in balanced ways, together with knowledge of your subject, etc. Gabriella, your thoughts?
Yeah, I liked when Martha was reflecting, I can't remember actually what it was on, but she mentioned about the fact that God obviously has designed us to be like emotional people. And I think that having that understanding, we then, I don't know, value the balance that we use emotion within the classroom and with our students, and just, I don't know, it's just cool to think about the fact that we are given these emotions and they are to be used for glory, and in the classroom especially, that affects kids and how they learn and then to experience. I don't know, it's just cool.
Yeah, that was really well said. In that any movie you watch from Hollywood or wherever, it's the emotion that draws you in. I mean, you just wouldn't watch it, but when it begins with something emotional, you're on the edge of your seat because there are emotional things going on. And I think students see that, they catch that when you share some of the emotion that can be found in science or English or history. It's valuable when they catch some of that. Martha, your thoughts on what stood out, and then Alex. And then
so for me, just I guess understanding the value of emotions and the role that they play in education as a whole, not just in creative arts, but in history, in maths, in science. There's still a really important element to dig into. In the emotional side of things. Yeah,
so good. And every subject can benefit from recognizing the role of emotion. Alex?
Yeah, I think it was important that you shared about the role of emotions in critical thinking, and that our feelings and emotions of anger and fear can hold us back in our thinking, and our feelings of interest can actually enhance our ability to think. And that was something that stood out to me.
Yeah. And of course, the only way to deal with that well is to acknowledge it humbly. And sometimes in an essay, one might write down, I feel passionately about, or I have been raised in this group. And it's challenging to do that. And then Kieran, your thoughts?
I mean, we only touched on it very briefly, but I think music for me is a very, very, very big part of like my life. I'm always listening to music. I'm always playing music. I love learning new instruments, and I've noticed recently in the past couple of years that especially worship music, because there's such a broad display of genres for it, that music actually helps me regulate my emotions and my feelings, and it just really helps to help me understand what I'm feeling, not necessarily make it go away, but just help me come to terms with the sort of the ideas behind what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it, and all of that stuff. It's very very useful.
And Bible reading can do that as well, and prayer can do that as well, and you can play the music, and you can sing the music, and you can play an instrument as well. And if you know 3 chords, you can play guitar. And so there are so many ways in which we can engage with the biblical, we can engage with the musical, you can engage with literatures as well, you can keep a journal. All of those things can help us to acknowledge and regulate our emotions. And so that's important. And also remembering that we're social as well, that we need other people at times where we can download and say, I'm feeling this. This is the challenge that I face as well. So recognize the importance of others. So hopefully that's been a very helpful 2 little sessions on emotion, and it's also been practical in that it can be applied in the classroom. So thank you each one, and look forward to next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.